Good afternoon and welcome to the Board of County Commissioners, Hillsborough County Land Use Workshop. And we'll begin with Planning Commissioner Melissa Zornita, or of the Planning Commission, I should say.
Actually, it's going to be Tony Garcia with the Planning Commission, but thank you, Madam Chair. What we have for you today is we're going to be doing some briefings on our April cycle of plan amendments, April of 2021. We have about 9 amendments to briefly go through with you right now to give you a heads up on what will be upcoming. Will be a briefing, and this will be followed by, these items will come back to the board on August the 19th for either adoption or transmittal consideration. So we'll kick off the items with the first 2 items being presented by Ms. Melissa Dickens. Ms. Dickens.
Hi, good afternoon, Commissioners. Melissa Dickens, Planning Commission staff. I am going to share a brief presentation with you today, so one moment, please. Are you all seeing a presentation up on your screen now?
Yes, we are.
Okay, thank you. Again, for the record, Melissa Dickens, Planning Commission staff. This item is HC CPA 21-10. This is a proposed text amendment to the unincorporated Hillsborough County Comprehensive Plan. This is the proposed recreation and open space section update. This update is proposed to replace the existing recreation and open space element, which is adopted today in the plan. As Mr. Garcia mentioned, this is a briefing today. There is no action required. And because we do have several of us today presenting updates on the unincorporated Hillsborough Comprehensive Plan, we wanted to share a brief status check-in with our progress on the overall comprehensive plan update. The Planning Commission staff is continuing our multi-year,
Before we go on, I'm sorry, I think we should, I have failed to do a roll call vote. I'm just.
A roll call, yeah, just a, Melissa. Yeah.
Sorry to interrupt you. With
Kemp?
echo.
Kemp?
Here.
Cohen?
Here.
Myers?
Here.
Overman?
Here.
Smith? Hagan?
Here.
White?
Here.
Thank you. You have a quorum.
Okay, and we're all on echo. We can move back to the presentation.
Thank you, and I apologize. I may have been too eager to share this item, so thanks for your patience. So I'm going to share my screen again. All right, are you all seeing the screen that I was on?
Yes, we are.
Okay, thank you. So I think I was talking about the multi-year, multi-phase update. We're pursuing updates to different aspects of the plan at different times, and working collaboratively with our county partner staff on the updates to each of these elements. And this is, I see, Mr. Putnam, do you have your hand raised?
I do, but that's more if we're trying to get something else done.
Okay,
Sorry.
I wanted to make sure. Thank you. So we are working collaboratively with our county partners on this update, and that's for a few different reasons. We want to make sure that the comprehensive plan contains language that is implementable, that it's something that is aligned with county strategic direction and the strategic priorities of each of the departments. We want to make sure that we are creating language that is working with the initiatives that are being planned, and also working with some of the other planning initiatives that departments are pursuing, like master plans and facilities plans. So it's been a very close collaborative process. In terms of where we are, the One Water chapter was adopted late last year in late 2020. And then we have the environmental and sustainability section coming before you for adoption actually next week. And then today you'll hear from us on the coastal management, recreation and open space, and solid waste sections. And commissioners, we also wanted to share for you all, as well as the benefit of the public, anyone who's watching, that we do have an overall website devoted to the comprehensive plan update. We have a centralized web page where folks can go to find out additional information about the update. And that's at planhillsborough.org/Hillsborough County Comprehensive Plan Update. And as part of the overview of the comprehensive plan update, we also wanted to provide some planning framework and context. Commissioners, you all are familiar with this. This is primarily intended for the public or stakeholders who may be watching. We have the unincorporated Hillsborough County Comprehensive Plan, which sets the long-range policy direction for a community through language in goal, objective, and policy form. We like to say that this is the sort of 35,000-foot look at the long-range direction for a community. Then moving more specifically, there is the Land Development Code, which contains more specifics about how one can use and develop land. That would include things like setbacks or parking requirements, specific environmental restrictions. And then there are also technical manuals. These are comprehensive guides to operations and technical and design specifications for projects and development. And I mentioned on one of the earlier slides about our collaborative work to ensure that what we're developing is implementable. We foresee the comprehensive plan update being implemented through a variety of different mechanisms, and that's one of the many reasons we're collaborating so closely with county staff. We see it being implemented through regulations and ordinances, capital projects, education and outreach to the community, and also other programmatic elements and processes. And so now that we've gone through where we are with the comprehensive plan update, I did want to share some background on the recreation and open space section. The first of the April cycle amendments is being presented to you today. The recreation and open space section is part of the natural open space chapter of the comprehensive plan. You'll also be seeing coastal management later, which is another part of that chapter. The last time that recreation and open space went through any kind of major update was back in 2008. Looking at some of the language, it appears to be even older than that, so it is due for some updating. And we've been working collaboratively with both Parks and Recreation and Conservation and Environmental Lands Management on updating this language. Do want to thank them and their staff very much for the assistance on this. They've been great partners in helping us get the language right. And we've made some significant updates to the proposed section. We've modernized and updated the language. We've incorporated best practices, not only in comprehensive planning and long-range planning, but also specifically with respect to parks. And we've also designed the language in a way that will be integrated with and support the master planning update, the master planning efforts that have been approved by this board. And so I do want to delve quickly into the updated, some of the highlights from the updated recreation and open space section. There are a number of new things, and we wanted to highlight these for you today. The first is that the current adopted element is somewhat silent on topics such as equity and inclusivity. And these are important topics not only for comprehensive plans, but also for the strategic initiatives of the departments. So we have woven in language related to these topics throughout the document. We've also refined and updated the language about providing access for all community members. We've created some language about integrating parks in the built environment and coordinating parks with other aspects of planning. We have some language on programming, specifically creating programming in our parks that enhances community health and is also tailored to individual community needs. So making sure that the programming reflects the needs of the particular unique communities within Hillsborough County. We also have some language that speaks to the language in the master plans on ecotourism and sports tourism. We have some updates on making sure there is inclusive engagement and feedback opportunities, some language on ensuring the feasibility of long-term maintenance, and also some language on criteria that that should be considered when new acquisitions are being considered. And then finally, we have language on green practices related to maintenance, as well as retaining the important language related to environmental protection. And so we do have one overall goal for the section today, that is to ensure an integrated system of recreation and resource-based parks that are accessible, inclusive, equitable, and enhance quality of life for residents and visitors in the community. And we have seven objectives supporting that goal. They are summarized here for you on your screen. The first is about providing an interconnected, adequately sited and maintained system. Then we have an objective about integrating parks with the built environment. Objective number 3 is about strategic and complementary partnerships. We have objective number 4, which is about programming. An objective about ensuring safe and equitable access for all members of the community. Objective number 6 is about continuing an inclusive engagement strategy. And objective number 7 is about ensuring the long-term fiscal health of the parks. And next, I wanted to share where we are in the process and next steps. We did go through with you all and have one-on-one meetings about this update, and we have incorporated the feedback that you all have requested. We presented that updated draft to the public as part of the June 2nd virtual public meeting last week. We got some good comments and questions from the public. We, of course, today is the board workshop. Next week will be the Planning Commission briefing. Then late next week, we're asking for all final comments and feedback from the public on the proposed amendment. Then we'll be incorporating that feedback and creating another updated draft for the Planning Commission public hearing. Then it will move back to you all in August for a transmittal public hearing on August 19th. Should you all choose to transmit this item, it will go to the Department of Economic Opportunity and regional and state agencies for their comments and feedback. And then it will come back to you all in October for adoption. And then finally, I did want to share the Recreation and Open Space project page. This is kind of our one-stop shop for the update, where folks can see what's new, what's existing, track the schedule and the phase of the updated section, review presentations from the public meeting or this presentation. That can all be found at planhillsboro.org/recreation and open space section. And this concludes my formal presentation today. I'm available if there are any questions. We also have representatives from Parks and Recreation and the Conservation Environmental Lands Management departments. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Cullen.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair. I saw in the beginning of, we saw in the beginning of your presentation, words like equity and accessibility for all members of the community. I think when it relates to parks specifically, it's important to have language that directly addresses people, individuals with disabilities, and I think also individuals at the sort of extreme ends of the spectrum in terms of age, infants and babies and children, and also amenities for our older population that also may have special needs. And I just wonder, within the document, are you specifically identifying aspirations related to these categories, or are we sort of left to intuit it from just words like equity and accessibility for the community?
Sure. Thank you, Commissioner. Great question. We do have specifics about what we are meaning in terms of equity and inclusion. The language under Objective 1.5 is all about safe and equitable access, and there we do talk about ensuring that that facilities, programs, even communications are accessible and inclusive for citizens of all abilities. We want to make sure we're embedding accessibility and universal design within the plan, and that's something that's stated. I know that's very important to the Parks and Recreation Department as well. We also do have some language in our programming objective that speaks to making sure to provide activities not only for the youth of the community, but for all ages, in ways that enhance the community health and are tailored to the demographics of the community. So we do provide some additional specifics about what we are aiming for in that regard.
And I think just to close out, because I don't want to, we have 10 items, so we need to keep moving. But the other issue I think that is raised by equity is to make sure that our programs are available with geographic equity, so that all of the districts of the county feel as though they're being treated fairly and as equally as possible. I know that a lot of that falls in our budgetary decisions, but because we're building an aspirational document about Parks and Recreation, I think it's important that we make sure that we do the best that we possibly can to divide the resources fairly and not make sure that they're not concentrated in one particular area over the others.
Thank you. Commissioner Overman.
Thank you, and thank you, Michelle, as well as Commissioner Cohen for bringing that up. This section of 1.5 is where a lot of that is covered, and I specifically honed in on that too, for not only equity in terms of making sure that we have a wide spectrum of activities or programs, but also across economic spectrums. So to your point, there may be certain communities where there may not be a balanced approach to providing facilities for those communities that we need to, basically start setting the bar to be more aware of that. And I think that's going to come to some degrees in how we make our decisions where resources are spent, but also in our partnerships, which is actually addressed in I think it's 1.3. Yeah, in 1.3, where we're talking about our partnerships, not only with private enterprises, with corporations, as well as developers, as communities are built, ways that we can enhance fairness in those types of investments within our community and can achieve the goal as a whole. So I just wanted to say thank you for bringing that up, because I think that's a core piece of how we look at any of these plan amendments. Thank you.
Commissioner Smith.
Thank you. And so I was just going to ask about the process. These for all these comprehensive plan element updates. They're all big elements with a whole lot of opportunities, or there may be some little fine-tuning of the words and or bigger revisions that we want to make as we go along. And I'm wondering about what is the process for that. I mean, I know we've each had briefings on these. You've talked to the public in public meetings about these, and now we're having a workshop where I don't want us to get to the first hearings and then be saying, wait, I said I was hoping we could change this language on 3.2.7 from this word to that word. When does that happen? And I already have, for example, talked with you and Melissa and Forrest in our briefing about just some small things to make sure of in the language of a few points. Has any of that been incorporated? Have you made any changes reacting to public input yet in what we're seeing now? Where do we get to really hone in on making sure that we put our stamp on this and get some get this wording exactly like we want it? Because at the end, the words really can make a difference. One shall rather than may, one encourage rather than will, can really make a difference. So when's our opportunity for making sure we're getting this exactly right without taking a whole lot of time? What's the most efficient way we can do that?
Well, sure. So I can share a little bit about where we are in the process. So first, to respond to the first question, Commissioner Smith, we have incorporated all of the individual suggestions that you all have made as part of the briefings into this draft. We've been keeping track of this based on versions. So this is version 2 with the date of May 26th. I will also share that because of the timing of when this packet went through, we will be having a version 3 coming forward that will incorporate any feedback and comments that you all have today, as well as any comments that we receive from the public. So we will be updating the draft and also communicating to the public using our website, using a mailing list of folks who have signed up who are interested, to make sure that we're communicating and getting the word out that we do have an updated draft. So we want to make sure that we are, being transparent with the public, with our stakeholders, with you all about when changes happen and when updates happen. I will say it would probably be good from a process standpoint to try to get any changes and significant changes included at the time prior to the Planning Commission public hearing. Of course, that's not a be-all, end-all. If things need to be modified following that, there's still an opportunity as part of the board hearing in August. But we are aiming to have a fairly set draft when we go to the Planning Commission, as that will give us an opportunity to incorporate feedback from the public. We also want to make sure we're getting all the feedback from stakeholder groups by that time. So that's sort of internally where we are in terms of a process in making sure that everything is included and everyone is getting the same updated information.
Thank you.
Commissioner Myers, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Last month, I had the opportunity to tour at least 8 of our county parks in District 3, and I must commend the Parks and Recreation staff for the way our parks are inclusive, accessible to all people that come, and even in the facility, the center itself. We have some of the best parks in Hillsborough County, including District 3. I took a tour myself of District 3 in the parks. So they do meet that criteria that we're talking about under the Goal 1.1, inclusive, accessible, and meet the current needs of the community. So I just wanted to share that with us.
Thank you. That being said, I do have some concerns and because of some experiences I had on this board before any of the others in this room were commissioners, 2 in particular. And I know I had asked about this, but I haven't followed up, so I'm not sure. In our former language, as we spoke about language being important, we had language that said that our parks and recreation areas were inviolate. That's the word that was used. And first of all, I'll talk a little bit about how it wasn't inviolate, but I don't want to lose that language and couldn't find it in the drafts, but I don't know if it's back in now.
Sure. I can point you to 1.2.9. Based on the feedback that you provided on that language, we have added that terminology back in. We've also updated the language so that it's crisper and clearer in terms of not only being held inviolate, but also explicitly stating that these items, that trails and recreation lands should be retained. So we have that, and we also have 1.5.7, which states that no actions should be taken which impair the access to or use of trails.
Great. Those are, and I think there might have to be further follow-up, and I'll just put this out there, in our land development code, in our ordinances, whatever it will take, because my experience here was, one, with the Upper Tampa Bay Trail, which I found out during the course of it, I didn't even know this, the Upper Tampa Bay Trail was almost sold off to a developer to put an apartment building on. Yeah. And he wanted to cut down all the trees and told the high school students out there that he was going to cut down all the trees around the Upper Tampa Bay Trail so that they wouldn't run into them by accident. And it was going to be a safety measure, and the kids just all looked, But at any rate, that almost happened on this board, and I was the only person at the time who spoke out and spoke out over and over again. We had another public hearing. We had Citrus Park Elementary School, standing room only, parking lot room only, and every single person who spoke, which probably was about 50, spoke adamantly against us doing that. But at the time, I was on this board, the only voice objecting, and I was shocked, seriously, that you could just sell away our publicly owned lands by a 4-3 vote. And inviolate in our language doesn't speak to that. To me, inviolate in our comp plan says it has to be an 8-0 vote to do it. Otherwise, you can't do it. So I'm going to be looking for, I appreciate this in the comp plan, but I think we need further strengthening of that somehow. There was a second park, too, that was almost sold, and that didn't happen, and that was Bacchus, where we have a park recreation facility that specifically works with special needs and with equestrian uses. And that also came very close and may still be on there to have had that happen. And I just find it incredible that someone can just suggest P3 or development interests or whatever, and that is such an easy thing to do. So I'll be looking at that. And as I said, I wanted the strongest language in the comp plan, but then I'll be following up too as we go on in the next year to try to make sure that never happens again in Hillsborough County. None, zero. And the second is that I just had some concerns. This isn't, again, the comprehensive plan, but when we talk about accessibility and equity, another thing that I've thought about is we have, in most parks, a de minimis access fee of $2, just so everyone knows that. I believe that that's true. We also, though we have some other fee issues, usually those are ones that I think are not, don't interfere greatly with accessibility. But we did have guided hikes and guided trail experiences through some of our parks. Now, some of these were done by staff, but some are done by volunteer groups, like Sierra Club and like Autobahn. And as I understand their policies now, and I've had this, and I haven't checked up on it lately, but Sierra Club was complaining very much about this, that they didn't want to have to charge people to continue to do their guided tours, but I think they were told that was part of policy. And the same with Autobahn, I heard at some time. So that maybe have been changed in the interim, but that's another question that I have about accessibility. Again, it's off this comp plan amendment. It isn't something what we would be including in there, but I just want to give a heads up that it's a concern for me in the future, however we work that through. And with that, I don't think I see anyone else that wants to come. Oh, go ahead, Commissioner
Just to
Conley.
follow up on what everyone said, because Commissioner Smith, thank you for clarifying with Melissa Dickens that we really ought to make our statements now. I think if we have specific, and so back to what I said earlier, I think that in section 1.5, as I'm looking through it, I think that 1.5.1 basically speaks to the issue, but I think it could be clearer, and I think it could specifically mention people with disabilities and age and economic ability to pay or whatever. I think we should call these things out because this is an aspirational document. And people are going to look at this as what we want them to do going forward. And I think if we don't spell it out, we just run the risk of it being misinterpreted.
Mm-hmm.
And I just would make that one suggestion.
Great.
Thank you.
So with all that being said, I think we can move on to the next item at this time.
Okay, Commissioners, thank you. That is also Melissa Dickens, Planning Commission staff. One moment, I do need to pull up my presentation, so if you'll bear with me just 1 second. I appreciate your patience. Okay. All right. Okay, are you all seeing a PowerPoint?
Yes, we are.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you. Melissa Dickens, Planning Commission staff. This item is also a proposed update to the comprehensive plan. It's HC CPA 21-11, a text amendment. The solid waste section update, similar to the previous item, this item is proposed to replace the existing adopted solid waste element. And this is a briefing today, no action is required. So before we delve into the element update itself, we wanted to share some context about solid waste planning in Hillsborough County and solid waste in general. Similar to recreation and open space, the last time this element went through a major update was back in 2008. The planning laws were different then. It was a different statewide structure. And we do have an older, kind of long in the tooth element that is really focused on disposal. It's focused on how do we dispose of the waste that's generated in the county. So it is, that is kind of the lens in which the current element is structured. And at the same time, there are our solid waste management division partners report that there are some challenges to capacity. The resource recovery facility is at capacity. And so as we get increased population growth, all that additional waste that's generated by the population growth is being landfilled. So any additional population growth, that waste is being landfilled. And so we really saw this update as an opportunity to re-examine the county's long-term approach to solid waste management. And rather than have something that is focused on disposal, really take a critical look at it and provide a framework for a shift in how we look at solid waste and look at it sustainably and sustainable solid waste policy. And so in terms of background on the element itself, it is the first section of the governance chapter of the comprehensive plan update. We have been working collaboratively with our partners in Hillsborough County Solid Waste Management, as well as Innovation and Resiliency. Travis Barnes from Innovation and Resiliency is joining me today for this presentation. And the solid waste section update sets the long-range policy for sustainable solid waste management in 4 different ways. First, it provides a framework for reducing waste generation and maximizing diversion from county operations and county processes. It also directs updates to other county documents like the Land Development Code. We also have an opportunity with the comprehensive plan to explore new opportunities for beneficial uses of waste. And then the plan can also be used to provide policy direction to guide programmatic enhancements and capital projects. And so now we wanted to share some highlights of the updates to the solid waste section. We are using the integrated hierarchy of waste management as a framework for this update. That speaks to waste reduction being the primary preferred approach, then moving to reuse, then recycling and composting, then energy recovery, and finally disposal being a last resort. And we believe that this framework will set up the county to be a leader in sustainable solid waste management, both in practices in terms of what we're asking the community, but also by example. We have this shift from the disposal focus plan to one that's centered on this integrated hierarchy. And speaking to that, we have expanded sections and additional policy language on reuse, reduction, and recycling. We also have some new language on leveraging waste as a resource and energy recovery. We have some language on increased emphasis on coordination, partnerships, and collaboration. We also have language that provides clarity on solid waste facility, siting, and resiliency. And we have one overall goal for this proposed update, and that is to lead in waste reduction, reuse, and recycling in a cost-efficient manner to provide for sustainable solid waste management. We have 4 objectives that support that goal. The first is adopting that integrated hierarchy of waste management, again, using source reduction as the primary approach, and then followed by reuse, recycling, and composting, and energy recovery, with landfill disposal being the last resort. We have an objective about leveraging waste as a resource, so not just looking at waste as something to be disposed of, but how can it be used as a resource and how can we find beneficial uses for waste. We also have an objective about ensuring the county leads by example. We want to walk the walk and make sure that our own practices and procedures are in line. I'll also share that the same staff members who are working on the Sustainability Action Plan were also involved in the proposed update to the solid waste section. So the same themes in more detail, particularly pertaining to the county, will be coming forward as part of the Sustainability Action Plan. And then finally, we want to continue resilient and sustainable solid waste management siting and practices that protect citizens and the environment. You all have seen this schedule before. I'll try to run through it quickly. Again, we have incorporated any comments that we've received from you on the one-on-ones. We had a couple of comments last week at the questions actually at the public meeting. Then after today, we'll move to Planning Commission. Then we'll close the public comment period. July 12th is the Planning Commission public hearing. It'll come back to you in August. Provided you transmit, it'll then come back to you in October for adoption. And then similar to recreation and open space, we do have a solid waste project page. That's at planhillsboro.org/solid waste section. And there folks can learn more about the amendment, the process, the background, and see where we are. And this concludes my formal presentation this afternoon. I am available for any questions. We also have Travis Barnes from Innovation and Resiliency, who's here to answer questions as well. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And Commissioner Smith, you're recognized.
So first of all, I just want to go back to the last item, and I've just been thinking about the inclusion and inclusivity and equity, and wondering if we might just be thinking about access in terms of a 10-minute walk or a 15-minute walk as opposed to a per capita measurement, when saying that all residents should have access to our parks. If we could just consider, I'm just throwing this out there, to consider using this as we develop, and whether we're developing farther out or not, to rather than to base the access to parks in per capita, if we measured it in terms of a 10 or 15-minute walk, if that might make more sense. Just something to think about during this process. Coming to this solid waste, let me ask staff if they've, one thing that stuck out to me was the, let's see, it's on page 7, 1.C.1.E, the solid waste level of service is being lowered from 8 pounds of solid waste per capita per day disposal capacity to 6 pounds of solid waste per capita per day. Has there been any comment about that? Has anybody raised concerns about lowering that level of service?
I'm going to speak briefly on that. We have not received any comments or concerns about lowering that level of service. Travis's team has done some extensive calculations on the amount of waste that's generated per day, and this number is actually much closer to what residents of Hillsborough County generate per capita per day. And so we felt it was appropriate to modify the disposal capacity to speak to that. I'll let Travis weigh in further if he wants to share additional information about that.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. Yes, so to reiterate what Melissa said, we do have calculations backing up why we reduced that level of service. The historical numbers were extremely high, in our opinion. So we have projections from multiple consultant studies projecting out where we're going to go with the waste generation within the county, and the changes that we propose are in line with those projections.
Thank you. It's fine with me. I don't think that I'd dispose of any more than that myself. I just wanted to know if there was any pushback or any unintended consequences or any comment from the public that we hadn't thought of as we lower that metric. The only other thing I'd like to ask about is, again, something to think about moving forward. Our last waste hauler contracts became too stretched as rapid growth cost the haulers too much as they were spread out, and we had a hard time at the end of the contract, dealing with that. There were some were about to walk off, I believe, and or not continue their contracts. And so I wonder if this is the place where we put something about timing growth with this service, with solid waste service. I'm looking for stronger teeth in timing of growth in every bit of our infrastructure. But I think it might be helpful here to be considering timing of this infrastructure so that we have some mechanism of saying, this is not fitting with our contracts or otherwise checking that. So that's a suggestion.
Does staff
Thank
have
you.
any comments at this time?
I do not have any comments specifically. I think that may be more in Ms. Byers' shop. So we will talk to her and see if she has any thoughts or comments on that and circle back.
Thanks. And I thought the 15-minute walk, that's an excellent suggestion, I think. I really like that. And I just want to encourage, I don't know if that's the right metric. I know you're not saying that necessarily is the metric. I hope we don't make it a 15-minute drive. but at any rate, I'd like to see some kind of metric like that, because I think that would speak a lot to equity in terms of availability and whatever else. And I don't know, there might have to be some other measurement in there besides, like the side of, beside a pocket park, or maybe it is a pocket park, or whatever it is, that it's defined, like, what kind of access to what kind of park. And I think that's a great idea. Did Commissioner Cohen?
Yeah, I think you're really onto something. And what I actually think is we ought to measure it both ways. We ought to measure it both in terms of how far the walk is and per capita, because the difference between the two is going to point out to us exactly where the inequities are. If there's huge per capita numbers supporting the park and it's not within walking distance, now you know where the real need is, I think.
That's a great point. Okay. So I think we're through with discussion. I don't see any hands up on the virtual screen, so if we can move to the next item.
Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. The next item will be presented by Mr. Diego Guerra.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. Diego Guerra, Planning Commission staff. Could I be provided?
We're sorry, we can't hear you.
This was working earlier.
There we go. It's working now. We can hear you now.
Your volume's better now.
Can you hear me now?
So it seems to be when you put your headphones in, when you're changing that up,
Is
it's
that
lowering the volume.
Okay, I'll just take them off.
We have your presentation up. Can you hear us, Diego? Diego, can you hear
Ladies and
us?
gentlemen, Diego Guerra, Planning Commission staff. Today
There
I'll
we
be
go.
providing a briefing on the coastal management section update.
Maybe at this point, we could move to the next item and get Mr. Guerra by telephone?
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, sorry. My apologies.
That's okay. You're on screen and we can hear you.
Perfect. The coastal management section is part of the third phase of the comprehensive plan update and part of the natural open space chapter of the comprehensive plan update as depicted on the slot on the graphic to the right. The current context of the element includes the language on estuarine management, beaches and dunes, land use suitability, emergency preparedness, post-disaster redevelopment, public infrastructure, and language specific to Port Tampa Bay. This is just a slide from the land use workshops held early last year in which the Board of County Commissioners provided policy direction that applies to the section update and we utilize as guidance in the update process. Guidance topics include natural resource management and protection, economic resiliency, excuse me, growth management and limiting exposure to natural hazards, mitigate the hazards to land development and infrastructure in the coastal high hazard area, mitigate natural hazards and their impacts to ensure sustainability and resilience of the community. This slide lists the topics areas discussed in the new section update. I do want to point out the substantial new hazard mitigation and resiliency policies provided by the recently completed community vulnerability study are incorporated into the new section. I also want to point out that policies specific to land use suitability are proposed to be moved to the future land use element, and policies discussing infrastructure are proposed to be moved to the capital improvements element, which will occur as part of this amendment process. We worked collaboratively with county staff who assisted in the review and refinement of the language. Approximately half of the section is made up of new language, majority of which derives from the community vulnerability study policy recommendations. Additionally, there are some similarities between the policy recommendations and some of the adopted language, in which case we went ahead and reworded and reformatted that language to include those recommendations from the community vulnerability study and incorporated those as well. The community vulnerability study provided 74 policy recommendations, all of which are incorporated into not only the coastal management section, but other sections in chapter and the warm water chapter of the comprehensive plan update, as shown on the slide as well. The new policy recommendations from the community vulnerability study address a number of issues, which include public education on risk, development location in at-risk areas, location of infrastructure in the coastal high hazard area, minimizing the number of structures in at-risk areas, evacuation and shelter space, natural resources as hazard mitigation infrastructure, and incorporating science into programs and operations. And similar to the previous slides you've seen, this timeline does provide key upcoming dates. We held our public virtual outreach meeting last month. Future dates include the 15 June briefing to the Planning Commission with the public comment period ending on 18 June, which will be followed by the Planning Commission public hearing and Board of County Commissioner transmittal hearing in July and August, with an anticipated adoption public hearing should the Board of County Commissioners transmit the amendment scheduled for October. And similar to the other two amendments, we also set up a project page where the public can and are able to review the draft language and review other background information regarding the project and the amendment. They can also sign up to receive updates on the project and provide feedback regarding the language or the overall project as well. And that can be accessed from the Plan Hillsborough website under the plan amendments for unincorporated Hillsborough County. Ladies and gentlemen, this concludes my presentation. I'm available for any questions you may have. Our points of contact are also on the slide should you have any other questions that arise after the meeting. We have county partners as well on the line should you have questions specific to the program areas.
Thank you. Commissioner Overman.
Thank you, Chair. I appreciate it. Thank you for your report. It was actually, I enjoyed the briefing. We played 20 questions and I got a lot of them answered, and thank you very much for it. But this is an area I have, it's kind of where the rubber hits the road in so many different ways when it comes to how we plan, how we grow, and how we deal with the realities of the risk of living on a coastal in a coastal community. With a big bay in the middle of it and a river in through the center of the county, or several rivers through the center of the county. And to give you an example, I have been recently listening to a lot of the residents that are challenged by the apartment complexes in the city of Tampa, down on the peninsula, not far from the base. And, suggesting that there's a challenge with having that many multifamily in that particular area, which I would assume is a high coastal area, given especially the level of flooding that occurs in South Tampa, that we all know very well. And so I was thinking about that when our comp plan and our growth plan is looking for ways that we increase density in urban areas where we can meet the infrastructure needs, where we could build the transit to actually service it, where we have assets to be able to create and deal with that, that need to move people rapidly, especially during a hurricane or an event where an evacuation is necessary. We haven't made the connection when it comes to approving actual projects. We haven't done it in many ways. And this does talk about it here, but to Commissioner Smith and Cohen's comments earlier, when does it get written into our land code? When does it get written into, into our zoning when it comes to creating the density that's necessary, say, for example, for affordable housing? That would make sense that it's tied to transit assets, but also make sure it's not in a high coastal area where it would be putting vulnerable communities at risk. So when I got to this section of these plan amendments, this one is what spoke to me the most. There's great language here, but making the translation into what it looks like in our land code and our zoning is really critical, because there's great language in this comp plan change, but we don't have it as an eye in how we make decisions on approving projects. And so if this, in its general language, is approved, we have work to do. We have a lot of work to do, because we are approving projects that are in conflict with this. We aren't adopting a regional transit system that can move people from high hazard coastal areas to high ground quickly. And we haven't done that in a long time. So I think this is going to be an area that we do need to really look at very carefully, because this, I think, given it's in a different way. We've dealt with a health crisis that all of a sudden we had to think things through and go, how do we fix this? But, and we haven't been hit directly by a hurricane, for example, or a major flood event. But I've lived on the river when we've had one, and it's damaging, and it takes a long time to recover. And you literally have maybe a half an hour or 30 minutes to get out of the way when something like that happens. So I appreciate what's been presented here, but I think all of us need to look very carefully at this to see, and to work with staff to see, if we are agreeing that no plan amendment within a coastal height, for example, in section 3.2.6, no plan amendment within the coastal high area that increases density will be approved that would exceed the 16-hour evacuation level of service for a Category 5 storm. Well, how many areas of our county already exceed that? whether it's in any of our cities or in our county. So I think this is going to be a really important section to review and find out the consequences of adopting these standards, and then what zoning or permitting processes need to be adjusted to be able to effectively do it when it's approved. And that's my concern, is that we have great aspirations here, but that one right there is a pretty big one, because we have areas that don't have that bandwidth right now, if we really look at it. So I just wanted to make sure we're thinking that through, because this has some great language in it, but our vulnerability workshops that we had last year, I believe, the Sustainable and Vulnerability workshop that we had last year, was eye-opening at how much risk we've already taken on. And if this helps us not take on more, that's great. But it means that we have to stop doing what we have been doing in order to avoid doing that and furthering the damage. And I'll stop there.
Commissioner Cohen, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I want to just start out by saying to the staff that I think this is a great start on a very, very complex question for us. And Commissioner Overman is exactly right. This really goes to the very heart of some of the real life decisions that we are making. And I just want to make a couple of points about it. The first is that when I look at the coastal high hazard area map, I see the city of Tampa completely excised from it. And in fact, I don't know how we can really address this issue if the most low-lying and most populated part of the county is not included. So my first thought is that to whatever degree we need to really be in lockstep with the city of Tampa, we should be. Because if we're not, this whole effort is really gonna be for naught. And there's an awful lot of references in here to working with the Port Authority, which I think is outstanding. But if we don't have the city doing the same things, I think we're really behind the eight ball. You know, you bring up the area south of Gandy and all of the development down there, and you're absolutely right. It's the most obviously low-lying and flood-prone area of the city, and the city is spending a lot of money on stormwater improvements down there. But they're stormwater improvements. They are not coastal improvements. They're not raising the coastline. They're not preventing storm surge. They're simply pumping out the water that comes with an average afternoon rain. And the problem, I think, that where the real rub is that as this commission, and I'm looking at Commissioner Smith, but it's everybody, works to control suburban sprawl and tries to send development into the areas that have been targeted for it and that need the density, we're running right into the wall of the coastal high hazard area and the areas of the city that are feeling burdened by their own lack of infrastructure. So we really are going to have to wrestle with that as we move forward. And it's really important that these policies give us the kind of guidance that will allow us to make the tough decisions when the time comes. I can't think of how many times we make land use decisions based on what the comprehensive plan tells us. So if we revise it and it doesn't say what we need it to say, we're just going to be exactly back where we started. The final thing I wanted to point out is that the Tampa Bay Regional Planning Council is doing a tremendous amount of work on resiliency. And the same way that I see here that we're going to be working with the Tampa Bay Estuary Program, we really ought to be depending on the work that they are doing at the Planning Council, because I will tell you they are ahead of everybody else in terms of their ability to forecast and sort of how far into the future they are looking at these things. And I just want to mention in closing that the Tampa Bay Regional Planning Council is going to be having a resiliency summit at the end of January. It's a 2-day event at the Hilton Carillon Hotel right over the Howard Franklin Bridge in Feather Sound. And I really think, from what I've seen of the agenda that they're preparing, that it speaks right directly to these issues. And I hope we're going to have people monitoring that and adding to this I think we're probably going to have adopted this by then, but we can always return to it over and over again and add to it, because I think the more that we learn, the more that we need to make sure we keep up with this. This is one of those pieces that's going to have to be looked at all the time, because this one, the facts on the ground are going to change constantly, based on the kinds of projections that we're seeing related to sea level rise and climate change and weather patterns and that kind of thing. But again, I think it's a great start, but I think this is the kind of a piece of the document that's never going to be finished. It's just going to be a constant in process, and hopefully we can have something that can give guidance when people put in proposals for developments. This document should guide them as to what our expectations are and what we're prepared to approve and not approve, so that it's out there for people to see.
Thank you. Commissioner Smith, you're recognized.
Thank you. I totally agree with everything that has been said, and would just like to underscore the need for us to understand what this does and doesn't do for us, because, Commissioners, we have always had language in our comprehensive plan advising us, encouraging us not to increase density in the coastal high hazard area, and the county has been constantly increasing density in the coastal high hazard area. The poster child was a case some years ago on a spit of land, actually part sandbar in the middle, literally the middle of the Little Manatee River called Mill Bayou. Developers came in, wanted more density, wanted to build houses on it. Planning Commission, they had all this stuff in there for protecting the coastal high hazard area. That's a dynamic tidal river that floods that little sandbar floods all the time. And the Planning Commission said it was consistent with this. Development Services said it was consistent. Zoning Hearing Master was fine with it. I led a lot of community opposition. We won, we lost, we won, we lost. The developer went bankrupt, and we bought it for ELAP. Whew. But that's just one example I can tell you of an egregious place where we should not be increasing density, and they come in and wanted to increase density, and although we had all this language in there, I don't really see much change, honestly, encouraging us not to, or discouraging increasing density in the coastal high hazard area. It didn't stop that. So when we talk about, what we need moving forward, I hope that all this planning staff is hearing that after waiting for 10 or 12 or 14 years to update these elements, now is the time with this board and with this community and with the political will that we have in our community to ensure that we're setting ourselves up for making better decisions, zoning by zoning, because that's how we grow, zoning by zoning. And so, yes, what's in this comp plan is important, but this is our chance not just to correct the typos and make it more better organized and add some a little bit updated language that makes us, feel good. This is the time to put some teeth in that will do what this board has been looking for, what our community has been looking for, to guide us to do growth better than what we've been doing. So I hope that the staff is, encouraged and inspired by this board's willingness to take some risks, to try something stronger, to bring us something stronger and let us say, no, that's too strong. So, do the things that your planning background, that you went to planning school for, that you presumably read planning books about and go to planning conferences and bring us some tough stuff and help us to do a better job of managing growth as we move forward. Tampa Bay Regional Planning Council is a good source. So I don't know. I just hope that we don't waste this opportunity and all this work and end up with a coastal high hazard element that sounds good, and the lawyers are still telling us it doesn't allow us to consider that in our zoning decisions. Thank you.
Commissioner Overman?
Thank you. And that's exactly kind of why I said earlier, this specifically, this element, even if we proved everything else, but we still had work to do on this one, in my opinion, has the greatest amount of work, because it does need to be coordinated with development services. It does need to be coordinated with our land use, and it does need to be coordinated with our municipalities. Temple Terrace has water near it. Plant City's out there, but is in high country, with rail around it to help people move if need be. But more importantly, the city of Tampa is a very vulnerable community because of the nature of how it's developed over time in the south part of the city. So I think it is critically important that we have a cohesive coordination with, especially the city of Tampa and East Tampa too, to make sure that we're taking into consideration the risks associated with that area. When I first moved here, I moved to Davis Island at the time, and it was early on before people actually called it anything other than Rat Island at the time, so it wasn't as what people think of now. But I moved there, and I was stunned by several things. One, how flat Davis Island was. Two, how many big boats were bigger than everything I saw that went by, real close to us. And three, everything that was over at the port. It seemed like it was like a stone throws away. That to me represented a hazard that I was like, oh dear Lord, how can I live this close to this? And be okay during a storm. Because I grew up in hurricane country. When I was young, I lived in New Orleans. And they came through, and they wake you up, and they do help you realize what you don't want to imagine, right? So as a child, I remember seeing some of that. And this section speaks loudly to that, to being responsible about ringing the bell of things that we need to do in a good way so that we keep citizens safe, and as well as are the investments of infrastructure in our community, whether it be neighborhoods, whether it be county buildings and facilities, whether it be our port, so there's a lot of partners in this conversation that we do need to bring to the table. And I'm curious what staff's thought process is about how we do that, because the other elements I think we've got pretty much figured out, but this one's going to take more folks at the table than the seven of us to do, and given the implementation necessary to really actually do what this says. As you mentioned, it's aspirational. However, at the end of the day, comprehensive planning should be the guiding principle when we approve projects, actual permits, actual zoning. And so I think it's critically important that we have an understanding of what that process looks like for this particular plan amendment. Adam, do you want to help me with that one? I knew you didn't want me to answer that question, but I think it's important for us to make sure that we're helping staff help us, because I think that's an important thing to do.
Yes, Commissioner, agree fully that these are things that we do need to look at in our code permitting for opportunities to nail some of these controls down. We are also looking at the role of coastal high hazard area and adaptation areas in opportunities for transfer of development rights, and not only not intensifying it, but also providing incentives to move out of those areas. We're looking also at the construction standards. I think we've got some coming to the board next month that are designed for. I mean, these are kind of small things, not necessarily the big picture, but we've got some amendments coming that will help protect foundations in vulnerable areas from wave actions. I know these are kind of immediate things, but agree that in the immediate, longer, middle, longer term, we are trying to find ways to incentivize or discourage, if not stronger, development in those vulnerable areas, and seeking stronger controls over things that would increase the rights that are on the ground today. So that's sort of a general answer, but agree that we certainly, this is even more, becoming more critical by the day issue for us to get our hands around.
And this is why I wanted to make sure that to ask that question, because it also does mean coordinating with the city. You know, the city is going to typically be the first one to declare, or want to declare emergency, because they've got to get through the county to get to high ground frequently. And so I think we have a vested interest in negotiating these solutions and coming to common ground. And I'm just curious how do we go about doing that productively? I mean,
I think
I heard a voice.
I think
I heard a voice.
the rest. I'm thinking this conversation is getting too far afield here in terms of how we influence city policy, or So I think maybe we can just lay that as a concern, and at this point.
Madam Chair, Sean College, Planning Commission staff. I can just respond really quickly to that. I can clear some of that up. Working with Diego on this element, we are coordinating really heavily with the city of Tampa. We actually did their community vulnerability study a few years ago, and we're gearing to start working on their comp plan. And I have been serving on a number of their studies that they're working on right now on resiliency issues. So we are coordinating with the city of Tampa. We also are coordinating this elements and these changes with a number of different departments of the county, Adam Crumley's staff, Kevin Moran's staff. So it's coordinated very well with what their operations are. And finally, also just to respond, the Regional Planning Council, we also are ongoingly coordinating with the Regional Planning Council and the Resiliency Coalition. County and myself both have seats on the Resiliency Coalition. And I actually helped plan their last summit last year, and we'll be working on their summit this year as well. And they did review this element, the coalition and the staff of the Regional Planning Council, and provided comments, as well as the estuary program. And we incorporated some comments from them. So it is very heavily coordinated with those groups, and I appreciate your comments on that. Thank you.
Great, thank you.
Mr. College, as long as you're here, just refresh my memory here, because when we had the dredge-filled land, which was in the city of Tampa just last year or the year before, was very controversial. But under our high hazard coastal and everything as it's set now, didn't the Planning Council find it consistent with the comprehensive plan to develop in those dredge-filled places that the developers bought for pennies? I mean, and how can that be? And how do we make sure that that doesn't happen again, that the Planning Commission finds that consistent?
That particular case was in the city of Tampa, not the county.
I understand.
But yes, what occurred there was they were asking for a land use, and they did not have a land use. And the Planning Commission did find that giving them a land use was approvable. However, that does not mean that they have the environmental authority to actually implement, any specific development or fill. And presumably, the environmental regulations would have prevented that fill. Now, we did initiate after that comprehensive plan amendments in both the city of Tampa and the county that have new policy that would act to prevent it even probably getting that far into futures. And those were adopted by the Board of County Commissioners.
Okay, now I remember that also, and I was very concerned that that doesn't happen again, because I found that kind of shocking. And that's why when we started to get into city policy and everything, I was like, thinking about that prior to you asking that question. I just thought, where do we go with all this? I also just want to point out, and I appreciate and have the deep concerns, of course. How could you not in this community be concerned about sea level rise? We're ground zero in the world practically for this. For high hazard coastal areas, for the more intensity of the hurricanes that are coming and the storms that are coming from climate change, all of these issues are affecting us. I just like to point out that one of the things is our coastline, and I'm just speaking to the county here, is very lightly and appropriately developed in most cases. There's very little development to the east, for instance, to the west of 41, because it's such a dangerous area. I don't see that increasing in intensity and development there. We have Apollo Beach that was developed before all of this was taken into consideration. That's an older community. We have the other areas which through ELAP and in many ways through the work of Commissioner Smith, E.G. Simmons, Regional Park, Cockroach Aquatic Preserve, and there's been a lot of successful land purchase. I know that there were some lost fights with Little Harbor that's in the high hazard coastal area in the county, but there's in the county for the most part and through perhaps just whatever reasons, that there isn't really the issue, I think, that is present in the city in just legacy development and whatever else. But I would like to point out that just because we go for densities in the city, transit, and all of those things, and in our urban service area, it doesn't mean we have to do, even in that area of Gandy, density like the density that was put down there. You can do, development density even in that area that didn't have to be as intense as it was. I mean, I've been shocked by the development that has gone on there, and I understand why people would be shocked. And I wonder too about a suggestion that Commissioner Overman made. I wonder if there could be anything in there about transportation access to get out of there quickly. And I think one of the reasons that the county becomes involved too is because actually the county has the contracts with the schools to open up the schools for emergency services. So it's also the schools involved when there's an emergency called. Mm-hmm. So that's like how it's all tied in. But I just want to point out, because just because we're not allowing development for the most part in the high hazard coastal areas, it doesn't mean that we need to be pushing out beyond the urban service area. You can build, in fact, Andres Dewani, very known, the father of kind of neo-urban design, and believe it or not, he did the community plans for Apollo Beach, and I was sitting down there for the whole week as he did it, and he showed Apollo Beach, and he said he overlaid downtown Tampa over it. He said it could have the density of downtown Tampa in that little area. Any area, not suggesting that we should do that, but you can get appropriate densities as they've done all through Europe with 4-story buildings, and without necessarily moving in to other areas where infrastructure isn't in place and where it isn't appropriate. So I just wanted to draw that line, because we have a county that's the size of the state of Rhode Island, and there's plenty of appropriate great places for development. And so I just want to, the balance is where we strike, and we certainly don't want to be throwing a bunch of development down in the high hazard coastal area. In fact, part of the transferred development rights that I saw in a lot of places were transferring those rights away from that area, but we don't actually have many to be transferred away in those areas here in the way that we've developed. But at any rate, I thought it was important to throw some of this out there, and I'm glad I got to ask about what happens with our dredge fill in the future. And Commissioner Cohen.
Briefly, I was on city council when we considered that. It was recommended by the planning commission. It was defeated unanimously. I remember sort of a witty line. I felt like I felt like we were being asked to approve smoking on airplanes. I think was the thing. But what I was going to suggest is when we are done with a revised version of this element, I think we should take it and send a letter to the Tampa City Council and say, here's what we just passed. You all ought to pass it verbatim, because the best possible thing would be for us to have identical policies so that there's no distance whatsoever between where the two jurisdictions stand on this particular critical issue. You know, we can have different priorities in terms of what we want to do with our parks, but in the coastal high hazard areas, we ought to really speak as one voice, I think. So when the time comes, I think that's how we ought to handle it.
Okay, and I see no more discussion at this time. So we'll move on to item number 5.
Thank you, Commissioner.
I'm sorry, 4. Boy, we're not getting through this very quickly.
This is the privately initiated.
Tony, you're muted.
I'm muted. I muted and unmuted myself, sorry. So the next 2 items that are going to be before you now are going to be presented by Ms. Unica Mills. And the remaining items on your agenda today are map amendments. So we have concluded the text amendments for the plan update. So the remainder of the amendments before you will be map amendments. Thank you so much.
Daniel, can you please bring up my presentation, 2101? Good afternoon, Commissioners. Unica Mills, Planning Commission staff. I'm here to present HC CPA 2101, Valrico Station and Silver Lane. Next slide, please. The proposed amendment is located within the eastern portion of Hillsborough County. Next slide, please. To give you some background, this is a privately initiated plan amendment located within the urban service area on approximately 14 acres, and it's not located within a community planning area. Next slide, please. Here is an aerial of the site to give you an overview. The plan amendment site is located just south of State Road 60. Mulrennan Road runs along the eastern portion of the site. There is also a railroad track that runs along the eastern portion of the site. As for the uses in the area, there is single-family residential uses located to the south of the site. There are heavy industrial as well as commercial uses located north of the site. There is a mobile home park that's located on the eastern side of the railroad tracks, east of the site. Next slide, please. So currently the site is designated as residential 4 and a small portion that's also designated as residential 9. Other future land use designations in the area include office commercial 20, which is located kind of northeast of the site. We have heavy industrial located directly north of the site. There is also some residential 6 to the southeast of the site. Next slide, please. And the proposal before you today is to change the future land use designation to residential 20. Next slide, please. As for impacts of the site, currently at our residential 4 and residential 9 future land use classification, the maximum density.
We're having some issues
Ms.
with
Mills,
hearing.
You're cutting in and out, so if you stop sharing your video.
150,000 square feet.
She can't hear us either.
Ms.
Yeah.
Mills? If you
Yes.
stop sharing your video and just use your audio, that should clear up the issue. We're just having issues where you're breaking up.
Oops. Gotcha.
So I'll continue sharing the video, just use your audio.
Okay. Again, with the adopted future land use classification at residential 9, at a 0.5 FAR, a little over 8,000 square feet could be considered on the sites. Of course, that is all subject to locational criteria. The potential with a residential 20 future land use designation change, a maximum of 296 dwelling units could possibly be developed on the sites. As far as the maximum intensity, that would increase to a 0.75 FAR, or a little over 480,000 square feet of non-residential uses. Of course, again, that's subject to locational criteria. As you can see, or as you may have seen from the aerial, the site is already developed with some multifamily uses. So the potential of getting up to 296 dwelling units would not be actually realized. This actually is going to be an extension of the already developed multifamily on the site. Next slide, please. For this particular amendment, I will be back before you on August the 19th for a public hearing. This concludes my presentations. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Thank you. I don't see any questions at this time, so we can move to the next item.
You please bring up CPA 2105. Daniel.
Should be on your screen.
Again, good afternoon, Commissioners, Unique Planning Commission staff. I'm here to present HC CPA 2105, South 70th Street and 66th Street South. Next slide, please. This site, again, is centrally located within Hillsborough County. Next slide, please. And this is a privately initiated plan amendment located within the urban service area, totaling approximately 16 acres, and is also located within the Greater Palm River Area Community Plan. Next slide, please. From the aerial here, you can see that Harvard Street is located to the north of the site. 70th Street is located along the eastern portion of the sites. 66th Street runs along the western portion of the sites. As far as the uses in the area, we have an established single-family residential neighborhood that's directly to the south. We have light and heavy industrial uses running along the western portion of the site. We do have some open storage uses located along Hartford to the north, and we do have some scattered single family located along the northeastern portion of the site. Next slide, please. Currently at its adopted state, the site is located within the residential 6 future land use classification. Other future land use classifications in the area include light industrial to the west. We have a presence of suburban mixed use 6 along the northeastern portion of the site. And we also have additional suburban mixed use 6 located further west. Next slide, please. And as for the proposed, the applicant is proposing to change the future land use designation to suburban mixed use 6. Next slide, please. As for the current intensity and density on the site at a residential 6, the maximum density that could be considered on the site would be 98 dwelling units. As for maximum intensity at a 0.25 FAR, a little over 170,000 square feet of non-residential uses could be considered on the site, subject to locational criteria. With the potential change to suburban mixed use 6, the maximum density and intensity would remain the same. The major change with this proposed future land use designation change would be that industrial uses as well as open storage uses would be considered on the site, or could be considered on the site. Next slide, please. Again, I'll be back before you at an August 19th public hearing. This concludes my presentation. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them. Thank you.
Commissioner Overman, you're recognized.
Thank you. The SMU 6 is always interesting because I'm trying to figure out, okay, what are we doing here? Are we building an apartment complex at the top of a grocery store, or are we building a used storage unit? Because it's pretty broad. So could I get kind of an idea about what we're doing here? I mean, I know it's not part of the comp plan amendment, but there's neighborhoods here and there's business here, and if it's multifamily with some mixed use about it, or even a senior community, or something. I'm just trying to get a better understanding of why we're leaving a residential 6 and going to SMU category. Can anyone share that with me?
Sure.
Am I allowed to ask that question? Because I'm trying to understand what the change in the plan amendment purpose is.
Sure. From my understanding, the request is to move to industrial type uses.
Okay. Thank you.
Commissioner Myers, you're recognized.
Can you put back up the last slide? I'm trying to determine what type of facility, a building, the way it's made. Or what is it that they're proposing? Yeah, but is it storage?
I don't think
that information
picture doesn't reflect. Go ahead.
Yes.
That picture isn't a reflection of what they're considering, exactly they're considering. I don't believe that information will be privy to that information until the rezoning stage of exactly what they're actually proposing.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, next item.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Tony Garcia, Planning Commission staff. Once again, the next item before you is going to be 2106, and the presenter for that will be Miss Andrea Papandreou.
Thank you, Daniel, for putting that on the screen. Good afternoon, commissioners. My name is Andrea Papandreou, Planning Commission staff. I'll be presenting HC CPA 21-06, Interstate 4 and 62nd Street. Next slide, please. The subject site is located within the Hillsborough County boundary and is just north of the City of Tampa boundary. Next slide, please. This is a privately initiated map amendment. The subject site is approximately 104.96 acres and is located just south of the Interstate I-4 and west of 62nd Street. The site is located in the urban service area and the East Lake Orient Park community planning area. Existing land uses for the site surrounding it include light industrial to the south, residential with scattered commercial to the east, and Corporex, a corporate research park to the northeast. Next slide, please. The adopted future land use category for this site currently is office commercial 20. Future land use categories surrounding the site include research corporate park, light industrial, and residential 12. A portion of the site does contain wetland and water areas indicated in light blue on the map. Next slide, please. The proposal before you today is to move to the urban mixed use 20 future land use category. Next slide, please. Potential impacts. For the adopted and potential future land use categories, the maximum density will not change and will remain at 2,099 dwelling units. The site is currently estimated to be composed of 50% wetlands. This estimate is based off the best information we have right now. We have not, Planning Commission staff have not received final EPC comments. When we receive those comments, we will update the density calculations and provide that information to commissioners prior to the August transmittal hearing. With the current estimate of 50% for the wetlands, the density credit permits a maximum of 1,312 dwelling units. For the adopted office commercial 20 future land use category, the maximum intensity is a 0.75 FAR with up to 600,000 square feet, and the commercial component is capped at 350,000 square feet. For the potential urban mixed use 20 future land use category, the maximum intensity is a 1.0 FAR with up to 4.5 million square feet. Factoring the wetland density credit, that leaves 2.85 million square feet. The proposed plan amendment will be tied to an anticipated major modification of a prior plan development, requesting up to 422,000 square feet of warehouse, distribution, and office uses. It is noted that this major modification for 422,000 square feet being requested will be far below the maximum 4.5 million square feet intensity proposed for the potential urban mixed use 20 future land use category. Next slide, please. That concludes the presentation for CPA 21-06, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Commissioner Smith, you're recognized.
Yep, I will just note, in light of our previous discussion of our concerns over resiliency and in the face of climate change and more and more frequent, more intense rain event storms, that it's not only the coastal high hazard area that we have to be concerned about protecting, but when we have something that is 50% wetlands, we do need to be concerned about those wetlands flooding, those wetlands being kept available to absorb rain from flooding the rest of the neighborhood. And so I would, ask staff moving through this to be sure that we're really keeping a sharp eye on increasing the intensity of the FAR, particularly while we still have the wetland density credits in place that allow the applicant or the future developer to take the density, the imaginary density, as if you could develop wetlands and calculate that and put it on the uplands, thereby increasing the impacts of stormwater runoff into those wetlands, because you're increasing the impervious surfaces around the wetlands. You're packing it all in and having less permeable surfaces around wetlands when you add a density bonus to the uplands, simply because there's a wetland there. So just ask signal that I'll be looking carefully at that, and ask staff to consider the ramifications of that.
Commissioner Overman.
Thank you, and thank you, Chair, I appreciate it. And to that point, as you can see from this illustration, on either side of I-4 is where these wetlands seem to be, right off of an exit or very close to an exit, because the water runoff of a highway is significant. I mean, it creates an impact on a community by having that water go through. And when you're close to a body of water, which in this particular case there is the bypass canal as well as other water bodies in the area, I think it's important that we do pay attention to that. But this is concerning. That wetland, right, is likely to be a runoff from the interstate. And then so taking into consideration its impact as it's developed and the amount of square footage that's possible needs to take into consideration the fact that we've got water running off that highway. So I'll stop there.
And I don't see any further comments. If we can move to the next item.
Thank you, Commissioner. The next item is item 2107, and the presenter for that will be Ms. Juwan Haley.
Good afternoon. There we go. Great, thank you for that, Daniel. Good afternoon, Commissioners. My name is Juwan Haley. Before you this afternoon is the briefing for Hillsborough County Comprehensive Plan Amendment 2107, Lakewood Drive and Bates Street. Next slide. Next slide, please. Thank you. The subject proposed amendment is located in Eastern Hillsborough County. Next slide. This is a privately initiated map amendment located on approximately 1.95 acres within the urban service area. It is located east of the Bates Street and Lakewood Drive intersection. Bates Street is a local roadway. Lakewood Drive is a collector. It's located within the limits of the Brandon Community Plan within the Suburban Character District. Next slide. The currently adopted land use is Res 6. This is a predominantly single-family detached residential area. As you can see, the entire area is surrounded, the subject site and the entire area is surrounded by residential 6 future land use category. Next slide. The request is to take the land use category from residential 6 to Res 9. So that is the change, the proposed change in front of you there. We'll go on to the next slide. So again, the adopted land use category is currently residential 6. The maximum density currently allowed on site is a gross maximum of 6 dwelling units. Currently on the site, it is 1.95 acres, so the maximum intensity would be 21,235 square feet. If the site were to go to Res 9, the maximum gross density would increase to 17 dwelling units. It would take the maximum intensity potentially to 42,471 square feet. And all non-residential development, which exceeds 0.35 FAR, here it would be around 29,729 square feet, must be for office or residential support uses. So that gives you a sense of the intensity options for the site. Both residential 6 and residential 9 are subject to commercial locational criteria. However, the site, just so you all are aware, is not meeting commercial locational criteria. So it is subject to it, but it is not meeting it. Next slide. And that concludes my briefing presentation. Of course, if you have any questions, I'm more than happy to answer them. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Kemp had an appointment, so I had to move over. So. Okay, I don't see any questions at this point. Thank you very much for your presentation. And with that, we will move on to item HC CPA 2109.
Correct, and that will be Ms. Unica Mills once again. Thank you.
Ms. Mill, you're recognized.
Good afternoon, Commissioners, Unica Mills Planning Commission staff. I am here to present HC CPA 2109, 58th Street South and 24th Avenue South. Next slide, please. The site is located within, again, the central portion of Hillsborough County. Next slide. This request is a privately initiated request located within the urban service area, and it's located on approximately 2.9 acres, and it's located within the urban area community plan. Next slide, please. And from the aerial, you can see here, 24th Street runs along the northern portion of the site. Causeway Boulevard is just to the south of the site. 58th Street is located along the eastern portion of the site. As for the uses in the area, there are industrial uses that run along the western portion of the site. Heavy commercial and open storage, excuse me, are located to the north. There is single-family residential located directly east of the site, and there is a vacant parcel located to the south. Next slide, please. The current future land use designation of the site is residential 9. Other future land use classifications in the area include, excuse me, light industrial uses to the west. We have office commercial 20 further to the south. We have residential 9 to the north and east. Next slide, please. As for the proposed future land use designation, the applicant is proposing to change the future land use designation to suburban mixed use 6. Next slide, please. Currently at a residential 9 future land use classification, the site can be considered for up to 26 units and a maximum of intensity of a 0.50 FAR or 63,000 square feet of non-residential uses. Of course, it's subject to locational criteria. With the proposed future land use designation to suburban mixed use 6, the maximum density and intensity would decrease. The major change with this proposed SMU 6 would be that the site could be considered for industrial uses and open storage uses. Next slide, please. This concludes my presentation. Again, I'll be back before you on August 19th for a public hearing. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Mills. I appreciate it. Seeing no questions, we'll move on.
Excuse me, Madam Chair. I appear to have lost audio feed. One moment, please.
Okay. There have been internet failures all over the country today. Did you notice that? Yeah.
There was a major breach.
Was that what it was? Oh, geez. The day the world had no news, that must have been amazing. we were totally busy. Yeah. All right, wait. Yeah, we only have one more item, so. Oh, almost there. We're still on the WebEx. I mean, I could still see us on the WebEx. Oh. You want to come sit up here? Sure. We good?
Audio check, audio check.
Still nothing from us either?
Audio check, audio check, audio check. Check 1 2, check 1 2.
Christine, you need to test from WebEx?
No, we've got an echo.
Check 1 2. Check 1 2, check 1 2. 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 Turn up the volume on the tablet down there. Check 1 2. Check 1 2. Check 1 2. Test 1 2. Yeah, that was the issue I was running into.
First thing I found, but I found it quick.
We got them both up now. Check 1 2.
Test 1 2.
Try it again.
Test 1 2. Test 1 2. Test 1 2. Testing 1 2. Test 1 2. I see a green light, but I.
Yeah, it's these tablets are not. They're not keeping me. Try again.
Test 1 2. Testing 1 2. Check.
I'm not sure what's happening.
Did it just stop in the middle?
Yeah, the tablet died, and then once it came back on, it wasn't going in. But you can see, even when I plug it in, it goes to the headphones for a second, and then it goes out.
That's two different tablets, two different.
Yeah, see, it's not even registering the headphones on there. Check 1 2. No. Test 1 2. Test 1 2. Check 1, 2. Check 1, 2. Check, check. Check 1, 2. Check 1, 2. Testing 1, 2. Testing 1, 2. Test 1, 2. Are you hearing anything, man? Is someone going to What's that? Check 1, 2. Check 1, 2. Check 1, 2. I don't know why this one's. What's up? No, is Tyler bringing me down a laptop? Testing 1, 2. Testing 1, 2. Testing 1, 2. Testing 1, 2. Looks like it's lighting up now. Are you hearing me?
Check, check, check.
Check 1, 2. Check 1, 2.
No.
We're getting light on the box now.
That was not.
That's done. Yeah, this is done. This done.
Where am I hearing that? Oh.
You're hearing it coming out of that speaker. But we are getting lights on the box now.
Joe, you have something?
Go through this computer. You know, I'm telling you, we're getting signal. I'm seeing it right up there.
I'll try it here anyway. It's here.
No, just.
Test 1 2, testing 1 2. Check 1 2. Check 1 2, testing 1 2. Testing 1 2 3. Check 1 2, testing 1 2. Plugged in. Testing 1 2.
Joe, you ready?
All right, they're on.
Okay, we're going to bring the meeting back to order. Right now, we're still recording the meeting, and we only have one item. And I'm going to, oh, we have all of it working. It's amazing. Okay, great. And as long as we have Mr. Garcia still with us, he can introduce the next item.
The next item is the last item, 21-13. I will be presenting this item. Dan, could you please pull 21-13 up for me? HCCPA 21-13 is located at 3450 East Fletcher Avenue. Next slide, please. The site is located, it's the northernmost amendment of all the amendments, as you can see on the general locator map, right there between the jurisdiction between the city of Tampa and unincorporated Hillsborough County. Next slide, please. Here's a more zoomed out version of the area so you can get a better perspective as to the context. This is a privately initiated map amendment. It's approximately 2.5 acres. It is located within the urban service area and is within the university area community plan boundaries. As you can see on the aerial, the site is on the north face of East Fletcher Avenue, just to the west of Bruce B. Downs Boulevard. Next slide, please. As the future land use categories go, there are several in the area that predominate the surrounding area. There are 3: residential 20, office commercial, and public semi-public. Next slide, please. This slide shows the request going from office commercial 20 to regional mixed use 35. As you can see, there's another parcel that's regional mixed use 35, a parcel away to the east. That was also the subject of a plan amendment I think we did it about 7 or 10 years ago, and that was approved also from office commercial 20 to regional mixed use 35. Next slide, please. So the potential impacts, the request from office commercial 20 under the current adopted, the maximum density is filled 50 dwelling units, and your maximum intensity is a 0.75 FAR, which allows a 600,000 square foot maximum, with a commercial component capped at 350,000 square feet. The request to regional mixed use 35 allows a potential maximum density of 88 dwelling units and a maximum intensity at 1.0 FAR, which would allow just over 220,000 square feet. This would also allow some additional uses. The plan amendment change would allow consideration of light industrial, regional scale retail, or research corporate park uses. Of course, the one big difference, I think, is the increase in the FAR to a 1.0. Next slide, please. That concludes my presentation, and I'm available for any questions, should you have any.
Okay, I don't see any questions, and that is the last item for today's workshop. Thank you all very much for your patience, and thanks staff very much for their excellent presentations. And with that, the meeting is adjourned.
And thank you to HTV and to